Thank you. Good morning. I don't think any of us should be here. We should all be out in the sunshine, since you are here. I'm assuming most of you are Oxford undergraduates, although looking around, I think some of you are slightly older, perhaps some members of faculty. But for those of you who are undergraduates, many of you perhaps destined for typical Oxford careers as management consultants or bankers, academics, accountants, lawyers, doctors and corporate executives. Can I recommend you forget all of that? Because what I'm going to suggest is that you go out and build something. Not necessarily building itself, but go and build a business or a social enterprise. Because I think you will find it a much more satisfying life than conveying leases, auditing organizations, or writing obscure academic papers. Hence, my mission today is to try and convince you of the merits of being an entrepreneur. Now, working for yourself is unlikely to be a smooth journey. Indeed, I think I can say with a degree of certainty that it will be a roller coaster experience compared to the life of a lawyer or an academic. But there will be highs as well as lows. So I'm going to talk today briefly about the agony and the ecstasy of entrepreneurship, the trials and the triumphs, and add a few maxims I have developed along the way. So for me, the journey happened here, started here when I was 18. That was when I first tasted the joys of being an entrepreneur. We didn't use that word in those days. There was no such thing as Oxford entrepreneurs. And like many people who start a business, it happened by accident. I was, as you heard, studying medicine, although because I failed my prelims twice, I wasn't allowed to continue that. I had to do physiology. In those days, they let you stay, even if you failed your prelims twice. Quite good, wasn't it? Anyhow, so I was all set to pursue a career as a doctor. But of course, what I was actually spending my time doing, which is what most students do, we were holding parties in my rooms at Magdalen. And the dean there, a man whose name I shan't repeat, said that if I continued, I would be sent down. So I came up with the idea of switching venues from my rooms at Magdalen to a local nightclub in what used to be called the Westgate Centre. The nightclub at the time was called Scamps. And that's where we were going to hold our parties. And my colleague, now a very successful fellow who you heard mentioned called Hugh Osmond, not Daniel Osmond, thought of the idea, why don't we charge guests on the door and the club can take the bar money for the drink? So we managed to convince the nightclub to do this on a Monday night when they were normally shut, and we spent weeks publicising our launch. This was obviously pre-internet, so this involved flyers and stickers and posters and word of mouth. And on the opening night, I arrived at 20 to 8, 20 minutes before we were due to open, and there was already a queue of people keen to come in. And so out of thin air, we'd invented an idea, this club of ours, and people had believed in it. And I think in that split second almost, walking up to the club that night, I thought, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to spend my career building businesses. So after that epiphany at Oxford, I started plotting. I managed to finish my degree, I have no idea how. And then I worked as a stockbroking analyst in an investment bank. Left that soon after I told my boss to F off across the trading floor. Not a good career move. And I moonlighted through this period with various part-time ventures in diverse fields such as diet software, restoring classic cars, reselling share registers, and theatre set building. Now, none of these projects, I have to say, was conspicuously successful. In fact, I think it's fair to say they were all resounding flops. But I was still hooked on the idea of being my own boss. And in 1989, I did finally take the plunge and went full-time self-employed, not before time. Although actually my time was very poor because a sharp downturn was about to start. But of course, by then it was too late. I'd burnt my bridges. And I think once you've made that move to becoming your own boss, there's sort of no turning back. At least I was fortunate in that I had no responsibilities to children or a spouse. So I sort of knew that if I failed and lost everything, no one else would suffer. And I also felt willing and able to simply pick myself up and start all over again. Because what one does learn is that failures are rarely fatal and most are unimportant. And I can tell you now, I've had a lot of failures. Now, I like to call them, my euphemism, tough lessons. Sounds much better, doesn't it? And I'll give you a few examples. So there was a time, for example, I and some partners spent $5 million opening a Belgian mussels and chips restaurant in Manhattan. Now, unfortunately, we took up with the wrong joint venture partner, a major US restaurant chain, who went into bankruptcy halfway through the project. Didn't help. We also chose the wrong location in New York. We hired the wrong manager. And we didn't use union labor to construct the building. So what that meant was the construction union picketed our building site, and they stuck a giant 25-foot inflatable rat outside our entrance on the launch party night. As you can imagine, it didn't have a great impact on the media there. So we shut that restaurant, lost all our money within a year. And then a bit more recently, there was a food production business that I invested in, backing a food entrepreneur. Now, I've sort of realized after a little while that the business wasn't going well, the books didn't quite balance, but I didn't do anything about it until one day I got an email from my business partner who was running the company saying, "Dear Luke, I'm going to have to leave the business because I'm afraid I'm both an alcoholic and addicted to cocaine." So that was slightly unfortunate, but it did become clear why the books didn't balance, at least. Anyhow, moving on. There was also an early scenery-making business I mentioned before, building sets for the West End Theatre. Now, unfortunately, and hard to believe in this day and age, but it was legal then, the auditor of the business that I bought into also sat on the board as the finance director. So curiously, the numbers didn't add up. Eventually, I rumbled this, and we had to let him go. We also then had to restate 3 years of past accounts, which meant the business went from being in decent profits, which I thought it had been, to being in significant losses. And then, rather more expensively, somewhat more recently, I thought I could stop the digital tide, and I bought control of a major chain of bookshops called Borders. I thought I could turn this business round, which was ailing. I thought I bought it very cheaply at a big discount. I hadn't anticipated the way e-books were going to take off. And of course, I had underestimated the incredible power of Amazon and the supermarkets. All a very big misjudgment. Very profound structural problems within that industry, and my plans were doomed from day one. So, just a smattering there, but I think you can say I've had my fair share of disasters, but I keep pressing on, because for freedom and for independence, I think entrepreneurship is impossible to beat. And what that actually means in practice is constantly weighing up the risks and the rewards of a venture, but never giving up overall. Now, as was mentioned before, in early 1993, I became chairman of what was quite a small restaurant business then called Pizza Express. Interestingly, the reason why the business was for sale, because it had opened one at the Golden Cross off Corn Market, the most expensive branch it had ever opened about 18 months prior. At the time, it had about a dozen company-owned branches and about 20 or so franchises dotted around the country. The business had suffered during the early 90s recession I mentioned. It had made its first ever loss, partly thanks to this extravagant branch at Golden Cross. And so the various owners had fallen out and they had put the business up for sale. I and my partner really, really wanted to own it, and we moved heaven and earth to persuade the founder, a brilliant man called Peter Boiseau, to partner with us. In a way, it was sort of remarkable we were taken seriously. At the time, I was a 30-year-old with an overdraft and no net worth. But I guess we must have had a certain amount of chutzpah, as they say. Anyhow, we bought the business. We took it public at 40p a share. And over the 90s, the shares rose to peak at £9 a share. We grew the number of restaurants to, as you heard, over 200. We bought back all the franchises, so they were all company-owned. We were very fortunate with our timing because lots of sites were available. We had a solid team of us partners, all shareholders on the board, all highly motivated. And I think Britain was definitely ready for something better than the then competition. At the time, Pizza Express was the number 3 in the pizza market. There was businesses called Pizzaland and Deep Pan Pizza, much bigger than us in 1993. Interestingly, within 10 years of that date, both of those businesses had shut down completely. Also interestingly, when we did our due diligence on the business, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accountants, said that the branch at Golden Cross in Oxford would never make any money and we should shut it. It became our most profitable branch within about 3 months of taking over ownership, so there we are. Don't listen to the accountants always. So by 1999, I felt my work with that business was done. I had gradually sold out of the business over the years, so I stepped down, but I used that success with Pizza Express as a springboard to do other things. I built up a company called Integrated Dental Holdings, which I co-founded, which is the largest chain of dental surgeries in the country. It was valued about a year or so ago at $500 million. Fortunately, I'd sold out rather before that. I became one of the principal owners of the market leader now in the retailing of wall and floor tiles called Tops Tiles, which has, I think, over 300 stores. I created from scratch another Italian pizza business called Strada as a follow-on to Pizza Express. I think that business now has 75 branches. More recently, although actually it's now 10 years ago, I became chairman and part owner of a business with just 6 branches called Giraffe, and I helped to grow that to 50 restaurants, and last year we sold that for £50 million to Tesco after 9 years. And then 7 odd years ago, I bought control of a business that had been going since 1926 called Patisserie Valerie. At the time, it had 6 branches and was breaking even. We now have over almost 140 branches, and this year our projected profits are about £15 million. And we are opening a new branch of that chain every 2 weeks, roughly speaking. Now, it's only, all these adventures have only been possible by pursuing a career as an entrepreneur. And I think my various ventures have confirmed the view I came to, that actually being ambitious and reaching for the stars is not a form of madness, but a worthwhile endeavor. And I think if you have ambition and energy, you should take the plunge in life rather than live a life of regrets, even if the odds seem unfavorable. Because as Lawrence of Arabia said, all men dream, but unequally. Those that dream at night in the dusty recesses of their minds awake the next day to find that their dreams were mere vanity. But those who dream during the day with their eyes wide open are dangerous men, and you can read women there too, because they act out their dreams to make them reality. Now, one of my disappointments with the economics profession is that they pay far too little attention to entrepreneurs. Most economics textbooks barely mention them, as those who study things like PPE will know. Yet entrepreneurs are the prime movers who start almost every company and create almost every innovation. Now, I write this weekly column every Wednesday in the Financial Times on this very subject. And so I give it a lot of thought. And I have also, in the last year, created a new think tank focused just on entrepreneurship called the Centre for Entrepreneurs. We published a big report last week on migrant entrepreneurs, which you may have read about. And so, given that I do think about this topic a great deal, I have come up with a list of 15 or so what I call entrepreneur maxims. So here they are. My maxim number 1 is that the most important motivating force for entrepreneurs is the desire for autonomy, not making money. First and foremost, entrepreneurs want independence and freedom. They want to be free of the bureaucracy and office politics, which almost invariably plagues larger organizations. Yes, they want to be rich, but more than that, I think they want to control their own destiny, and they want credit for their own efforts. Maxim number 2, a sense of optimism and confidence about the future is a precursor to being an entrepreneur. Keynes called it animal spirits. Cynics and pessimists simply need not apply for this role in life, because you have to believe in the possibility, as Winston Churchill said, of the sunlit uplands. And on a positive day like this, first in spring, warmest day of the year, the UK economy growing at 3.5% this year, why not take the plunge and start a business? Risk takers, by their very nature, their personalities, desire gain more than they fear loss, which is actually the personality of the majority of the population. And these individuals are willing to sacrifice, particularly highly qualified ones like you, a life of almost certain security in one of the professions, should we say, for the excitement and satisfaction of victory if their initiatives succeed. Maxim number 3. Enterprise is not a zero-sum activity. Socialists entirely miss this fundamental truth. They think capitalism is only about transfers. They fail to see that entrepreneurs and inventors add value and create wealth. In fact, generally speaking, and this is the theme of our Centre for Entrepreneurs, the more entrepreneurs there are, the better off we all are. Because although competition is tough, it's what drives improvements and higher quality and choice. Whereas, contrast that with the monopoly ideas of communism, which invariably lead to stagnation, incompetence, corruption, and totalitarianism. Maxim number 4, I've always worked with business partners. Now, some entrepreneurs, like Alan Sugar or Philip Green, are happy to do it by themselves. But I've always teamed up with others. I think it spreads the responsibility and it makes the journey more fun. Ideally, you find someone whose skills can complement yours. Perhaps you find that partner here at your society. Perhaps you find them when you're doing an MBA. Perhaps you find them as an undergraduate in your college. But I think if you divide the load, the difficult times are more manageable and the celebrations less selfish. So from my colleague Russell Joffe at Giraffe, to my old friend David Page at Pizza Express, to David Hudley at Integrated Dental Holdings, to Stuart Williams at Topps Tiles, and to Tom Molnar at Gales Bakeries, I have been very fortunate in my life to partner with some outstanding entrepreneurs a number of times, all fellow owners, equity holders, whose interests were aligned with mine. Maxim number 5, I believe in the concept of domain knowledge. What that means is I much prefer to work with entrepreneurs and managers who have expert understanding and experience of their particular industry. I do not really buy the idea of the general manager. I think that specialist technical competence, reputation and connections really do matter. Now, of course, all sectors require regular infusions of fresh blood from outside fields, but there is no substitute for lots of practical involvement with a solid operator before starting a new business. Maxim number 6, I have learned that patient money tends to achieve the best results. I do not really accept the hedge fund game of momentum trading or the social media dream of overnight global domination. When I chaired the Channel 4 pension fund, I was shocked when told by asset managers pitching to manage our pension fund that their typical holding period was a few months or even less. To me, that isn't investment, it's speculation. I think that genuine companies, generally speaking, take years to build. That probably makes me a little old-fashioned compared to things like WhatsApp, but my experience over 25 years of helping to grow many dozens of companies in sectors from recruitment to restaurants is that the good ones develop gradually and need steady nurturing over the longer run. Maxim number 7, probably the single most important influence that fosters entrepreneurship are role models. If there are close examples of business owners at home when you are growing up, then you are much more likely to see self-employment as a valid option in life. Now, it might be a parent, an uncle, but I think dinner table conversation when you are young makes a hell of a difference. Because I think entrepreneurship is much more about culture than formal education. And indeed, I think the more role models we have in society at large, the better. So the more Richard Bransons or even TV shows like Dragon's Den, the better. Because I think it all encourages young people like yourselves to see starting a business as an attractive alternative to that safe job as a banker or a lawyer or whatever it might be. Maxim number 8, I like obsessives. I much prefer an individual who is something of a workaholic and fails to get their work-life balance right than someone who is idle. I've met a lot of high-achieving entrepreneurs over the years, and most possess the characteristic of a one-track mind, at least to a degree. Now, alone, ambition is useless because it's not enough. It's got to be accompanied by talent and discipline and diligence. But I don't expect real entrepreneurs to be perfect Renaissance men or women, because I think exceptional performance generally doesn't emanate from the fully rounded personality, and one shouldn't be embarrassed or worried about that. Maxim number 9. Execution matters a great deal more than theory. I think a lot of business schools struggle with this. We can all write a great business plan, but actually only a few can carry it out. That's why strategists, in my opinion, are ultimately much less valuable than those with a hands-on ability to get business done, make a sale, etc. It's surprising how well slick talkers can be presenting a plan to raise money and so forth. But they tend to get found out if there is no substance behind all that charm. There needs to be follow-through and action, not just promises. And I think that's why an actual track record tends to be more important than a PowerPoint presentation, which is why I haven't done one. Maxim number 10. Entrepreneurs work hard, stating the obvious. It's not the life for those who are in search of a get-rich-quick scheme. I think you'd do much better to be a derivatives trader. Now, I didn't really go on holiday very much in my 20s, and I actually waited until I was in my 40s before I started a family. So I certainly made some forfeits for my career. And I don't have a lot of time, to be frank, for those would-be entrepreneurs who are not prepared to put in the hours and who are more interested up front in the material rewards than the actual graft of making a business work. Because as Ted Turner said, it ain't as easy as it looks. Maxim number 11, all my returns from investing have come from my big winners. As I said earlier, I've had plenty of flops, made lots of mistakes, but they're not significant in the grand scheme of things. The essential fact to remember that when you're building a business, you're investing in shares, in equity. And therefore, you can only lose your stake, assuming you haven't been foolish enough to give a personal guarantee, which I recommend you never do. But your upside is, in theory, unlimited. And if you have a big hit, then a 10 or 20 or even 100 or conceivably even 1,000 multiple of your original stake is feasible if your business does really well. Maxim number 12. The most impressive firms I've been involved with have adopted, whether knowingly or not, a philosophy of what the Japanese call Kaizen. My interpretation of this management method is a policy of endless small improvements, many of them initiated from the bottom up. What this means is lots of small details adding up over time to a better business, combined with an openness to such incremental change. Because organizations that fail to evolve, a bit like Oxford, tend to die, whereas those that embrace a spirit of innovation, perhaps Oxford, are more likely to prosper. Maxim number 13. Human nature tends to shine the spotlight on one man or indeed woman at the top, be it Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or whoever it may be. But actually, most of the finest firms are constructed by teams, not single people. And for example, when we did well at Pizza Express, it was because we had a sort of collegiate approach from our senior staff. All of us different roles, all of us stakeholders. Each, in theory at least, adding value and benefiting from the expansion. Because I think the cult of the genius boss is very unhealthy, both because I think it's inaccurate in very many cases, and because I think it ultimately helps foster a more divided system. It leads to excesses like employee chief executives of major corporations. These are corporations where they are simply a hired hand, not a founder, being paid 200 or even 500 times the amount the average employee gets. I think this is both bad for capitalism and actually it fails to deliver for shareholders. Maxim number 14, philanthropy and volunteering should be part of the mix. For the last 12 or 14 years, I've devoted approximately a day a week to various good causes of one sort or another, be they charities like Stage One, a theatrical charity I chair, organisations like the RSA, which I used to chair, Channel 4 Television, an organisation I joined last year as chairman of the Institute of Cancer Research, and so forth and so on. Because I think giving time and money, if you can afford it, to non-profit bodies broadens the mind and I think complements the work of an entrepreneur. Many entrepreneurs, indeed, get involved in actually starting their own charities or social enterprises, and I think this sort of engagement is equally worthwhile and healthy. And maxim number 15, entrepreneurs really matter, because they create the majority of the new private sector jobs, and all the surveys show that it is the most important element all around the world for a stable society. Good jobs, that's what people want, at every class. Entrepreneurs also punch way above their weight in terms of innovation and in terms of tax generation. And so this is why we launched our new think tank, Centre for Entrepreneurs, because we want to both research entrepreneurship but also help educate politicians, the media and citizens about the importance of entrepreneurs to our economy, our culture and our standard of living. So I think, to sum up my little talk, never let temporarily difficult conditions, which have actually prevailed up until the last year or so in this country, to the wonderful opportunities that will always await those willing to try. And remember that most of us are actually more disappointed by the things we didn't do than by the things we did. Now I'm going to cheat. I'm going to read you something by Teddy Roosevelt, my favorite American president, which he said 103 years ago in Paris. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who actually does strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. I think success is being vitally engaged in something worthwhile, making a difference for the better, enjoying life while you're at it. Those whom I most admire achieve lasting success by remembering also to volunteer and philanthropy, remember to try to create things, remember decency, and remember to remain captains of their souls. Thank you for listening, and good luck in your many adventures.